not to be? That is a question. It may not be the question, though. Fellow Toastmasters and guests, I'm going to talk to you today about questions. I'm going to talk to you today about questions involved with teaching. And you may say, well, I'm not a teacher. I'm just a parent, I'm just a friend, a father, a grandfather, wife, husband, what have you. Well, if you're one of those things, I guarantee you are a teacher. And what I'm going to talk about today applies both to the classroom and to teaching anybody in any situation. So this applies to you. I'm going to talk about questions. And this actually comes from a very long lecture that I normally give, or lesson. But I'm not going to do the whole thing because I have 5 minutes. So I'm just going to talk about why it's important to use questions when you're teaching. So I want you to think about that question to yourself, just for a moment. Why is it important that I ask questions when I'm teaching? What are the benefits? Now this is a rhetorical question, but it's important that I just ask that. You see, teaching does a lot of things. When I ask you a question, you are no longer in this passive mode that you were in. As I'm lecturing to you, I'm talking blah, blah, blah. Your brain is processing my information that I'm giving you. It's thinking about the information. It's comparing it to what you already know, the words, the context. But what it's doing, it's really in a passive mode that we do all the time. I liken it to an engine, a car engine. But the car is in neutral. So it's working. So it's active, but it's not really being productive. Your brain can be a lot more productive when it's doing something more than just sitting there and passively listening. And even asking you a rhetorical question will activate that engine. It makes you more productive because you're no longer just processing the things that you've been given. You're processing the possibilities. You have to solve a problem. What are those benefits to asking questions? So you go back in your mind. When have I studied teaching? When have I been a student? When have I taught somebody else? Have I asked questions? What good would asking a question do? What would the response be? So you're actively thinking about things that I haven't even brought up. You're doing that work. And the more your brain is working, the more you're learning. The better you're learning, the faster you're learning, and the more you are going to retain. So questions are really great for activating that human brain and getting to those higher levels of learning. So we want to bring questions into any learning situation. But that's probably not the only reason we want to do this. There are some other reasons. For example, I teach adults, and most of you probably have taught adults at some point, whether it's formal or informal settings. When you teach adults, and they're sitting there and they're thinking about all their experiences and all their thoughts, their values, the things that they believe in, they want to share that stuff because they're adult learners. So when you ask them a question and they can provide an answer to you, that's a benefit because they are now much more active and they're enjoying the class more. And besides, if somebody else is giving their example, then you don't have to as the teacher. It's easier for you. Especially if it's the student that you're trying to get, if it's one-on-one and that student is really thinking through that problem and you're asking them questions and they're solving it for themselves, they're really truly learning. That is some of the highest learning that can be done, some of the best learning. There was this guy named Socrates, and a couple of years ago he used to teach people things, a couple thousand years ago, and they have this method called the Socratic method. And the Socratic method is teaching by asking questions. So this is not new stuff, folks, but it's great stuff. So why else might you want to ask a question in a classroom? Well, besides the fact that your student is now doing the work for you, they have a different point of view than you do. They may have examples that are even better than your examples. They may have more examples than you could come up with. More real-world examples of the things you're trying to prove. Again, another great benefit. Another reason you would ask questions, think about it. If your students are out there and you're giving all this information and they haven't said anything for a while, how do you know that they're understanding you? How do you know that they're with you? You can try to judge their faces, but let me tell you, I've looked really interested in some classes that I was more asleep than awake. Unfortunately, that happens. So what we want to do is we want to know, how are my students gathering the information? Are they with me or are they not with me? Best way to find that out, ask them. You'll find it out really quickly. Now, there are ways to ask questions, and there are the right questions and the wrong questions to ask, and I wish I had time to go through this whole lesson with you. But let me just leave you with this fact. When you're going to teach someone something, we're all tempted to be this font of knowledge. I'm going to elucidate. I'm going to tell you all the information you need to know. I'm going to spread my wisdom and intelligence. But maybe what you should really do is just ask them the right question. And then they will learn the information better, and they will retain it longer, and you'll have done your job.